Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the loss of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Mulroney, who passed away yesterday, was 84 years old. Known for his economic reforms, Brian Mulroney was the 18th Prime Minister of Canada. He'll be remembered for such policies as NAFTA and GST, but also for his incredible devotion to public service in Canada. He was a statesman with great relationships around the world, including with American President Ronald Reagan. We're thinking of the Mulroney family at this time.
Hey, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Welcome to another episode of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. I'm Rachel here with Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast.
Okay, so this week we're doing a trip to the South.
Yes,
I wish we were taping from the Bahamas, but we're not. I mean,
No.
We are doing a deep dive on American politics and the American electoral system, which is super different from ours.
Yeah, and I think this is good timing because people are paying attention to the primaries in the US, watching Donald Trump sweep, questioning why that is. How is this possible?
Yeah.
We have Super Tuesday coming up, but the American system is a complicated system. So as you're reading the news or watching it on TV and wondering what some of the terms are, our guest today is going to give us a bit of a primer as we head into what will be a fall election in the US, so just a few months away.
Yeah, and really heating up. We're not sure why, but we're going to find out when we come right back with Moshe from Mo News.
Welcome back. This is a big moment for us on the Beyond a Ballot podcast. We have our first ever, are you ready for it? Man here. Not only is he a guy, but he's also American. So two firsts today, an American guy. We are so thrilled to have Moshe with us. Moshe Oinounou, the founder and editor and chief of Mo News. He's with us. Welcome. We're so happy to have you.
It's great to be here. It's an honor representing the United States of America and men here on the podcast.
Exactly.
You are both things to us.
He's both things. Okay, so
it's a lot of pressure. I hope it.
Yeah, you got it.
I can ensure you invite future Americans and other men.
And other men.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes. No promises.
So for those that don't know what Mo News is, because you've been living under a rock, Mo News is a news brand which provides audiences with balanced information, primarily on Instagram. Moshe himself is an award-winning executive producer, including an Emmy, and has been producing some of the U.S.'s biggest news programs, including being the executive producer of the CBS Evening News. He launched Mo News in 2020, and today he's here with us to explain the entire U.S. electoral system. Is that right?
I'm going to try my best to answer all of your questions. You know, in America, we take for granted our system and don't actually realize at times how complicated and confusing it is to all of you in the rest of the world.
It is super confusing. And as somebody that talks about Canadian politics and breaks down the Canadian electoral system, people always ask me, but what happens in the US? What's the Electoral College? What is Super Tuesday? And I'm like, I don't know. And if I don't know, then who does? So let's start with you, though, first. Tell us a little bit about you. You're doing incredible things in terms of disrupting the news media I'm going to say the United States, but around the world. You've changed the way that people retain their news. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that started?
Sure. So I, like both of you, worked in traditional media for a long time, behind the scenes mainly. Started out at Fox News Channel here in Washington. Spent a couple of years at Bloomberg Television, handling foreign business coverage, international business coverage for that network. Actually did some work with BNN. North of the border.
Yes.
And then
good throw to your Canadian friends.
Listen,
we know that one.
Had to. It was like peak oil sands, so I was doing a lot of stuff out of Saskatoon and Regina.
Whoa! Did
so
you ever
I can
go?
drop.
Did you ever go to Saskatoon?
No, I sent reporters. I didn't get to go myself.
We'll have to take you.
I did, start to develop some knowledge of the Canadian economy, etc. Anyway, fast forward, I spent 9 years at CBS News, so one of the 3 big networks here in the U.S. I was the executive producer of the CBS Evening News, so that's our national show at 6:30 at night, once anchored by the famous anchor Walter Cronkite back in the day. Still gets about 6-7 million viewers a night, so did that for a while.
That's like the total population of Canada, just for your reference.
If you could get 6 or 7 million Canadians to watch a single program at once,
yeah, that would be
deal.
amazing.
And so did that for a while, and then wanted to figure out what was next and started doing some consulting. And a few months in, COVID happens, and I find myself for the first time not in a newsroom during a major news event. And as a journalist who needs constant information, I found out that consuming the news sucks as a regular person. And so I took to Instagram as a better way to communicate with friends and family who were all sending me text messages, and it was just overwhelming. And so what I liked about Instagram is Instagram Stories is the last place you can put chronological things together. One of the last places that's not algorithmic, but like this happened and then this happened. And as you click through, you can actually designate the order of events and tell a story.
Right.
And so initially was doing it just for COVID headlines for a few hundred, and then suddenly find myself with thousands and then tens of thousands of followers and then celebrity followers, and realize that my COVID exercise is my next thing. And people are looking for new ways to consume news. And so over the course of the past 4 years, we've grown that to about 500,000 now on Instagram, and then built out a daily news podcast and a daily newsletter, aggregating headlines, breaking them down, calling out the media when necessary, and more recently doing more and more original news coverage.
That's so cool.
When you say calling out the media, I think, Canadians, when they think of Americans calling out the media, they think immediately of fake news, fake news, everything, which is honestly, it's become some lingo here as well.
Yeah.
Was that part of it for you? Because there was so much of a conversation around this idea of fake news?
Well, first and foremost, during the height of COVID, it was really combating misinformation. Okay. People hearing rumors, etc., or just trying to get to the bottom of stuff. And I think the problem the media had here in the U.S., and you can speak to what happened north of the border, is that they were trying to convey certainty at a time of uncertainty. And that led to a lot of confusion. Well, the officials say we don't need to wear masks. And then a couple weeks later, we must wear masks. Where did that come from? Where did the 6 feet come from? And so there were a lot of questions, even the COVID origin story. You were labeled a conspiracy theorist if you questioned the lab in Wuhan. And then a couple of years later, there's literally intelligence agencies here in the U.S. that say, yeah, it probably came from the lab in Wuhan. And so, suddenly, I think when we talk about the media, we're not just talking about fake stories, but we're also talking about bias. We're talking about not answering questions, covering stories that are irrelevant or covering them in an irrelevant way to the audience. And so that's a bit of what I try to do as well with Mo News, is also, given that I've spent 2 decades in the media, is also give you a sense of why things are covered the way they are. That it's not always malicious intent. Sometimes it's just pure incompetence on the part of the media. And some of it just comes from the fact that they're not connected. Many of the journalists, go to private institutions, live in New York and DC, are not connected to the vast majority of the country. And I think, that's something that you see across media, across countries, in terms of both experiential bias, but also ideological bias.
Do you consider yourself nonpartisan?
I do my best to be nonpartisan. I think it's, it's interesting because some people like to throw out like, well, you're unbiased. I'm like, well, first of all, no one is unbiased. We all have a bias.
Right.
As you introduced me, I'm an American. I'm
right.
a male.
You're a guy.
I live in Brooklyn, New York. I have certain inherent biases, where I went to college, my experience, like we're all biased. But what I try my best to do is approach all major stories with a nonpartisan lens. And, listen, there's not always 2 truthful sides to a story or 2 equal sides to a story, but we can still try to explain why one side feels the way it does. And by the way, sometimes there are 2 totally equal sides, but I think what we try to do is approach things in a factual way and a nonpartisan way. Here are why Democrats feel this way. Here are why Republicans feel this way here in the U.S. And do our best to lay out the table, to lay out what's happening, and then let you decide how you feel about it.
I want to give you kudos actually on that issue, because we've covered the Israel-Gaza war a couple of times on this podcast, and you have done such
tricky territory.
It is such a tricky territory, and we've really tried to stay center, both sides. And you've done a really great job at covering it fully, and the military operation and all these different angles without any specific slant. That must be really hard.
I try my best. There's so much going on. It is, I thought that both having covered COVID and covering Trump were the two most kind of incendiary, divisive topics.
Yeah.
And whoa, welcome to the Middle East, baby.
Boy, were you
right.
Every photo, every word choice, not what's used, but what's left out.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, people are like, well, it seems like you've stopped covering it. I was like, well, I can't make it 24/7. I mean, there's so many headlines that come out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, guess what's really difficult to cover? War.
Yeah.
Guess what's really murky? Everyone has an agenda. Literally, it's life and death for people.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a conflict that you could choose your starting point. Do you want to start in 1967? Do you want to start in 1948?
Right.
Do you want to start in the year 700 BC?
Mm-hmm.
We could start then too.
Yeah.
And ultimately, basic questions that people seek clarity to. Who's indigenous? Whose land is it, as everyone likes to ask me?
Yeah.
Just answer the question.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, when do you want to start?
Exactly.
It's not that simple. And I think one of the things that people have lost sight of is this is probably, beyond Ukraine and Russia, the second war we have experienced in our pocket on social media.
We talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And guess what? Wars have happened from the beginning of time.
Right.
Like you could go back and I think they think, war happened between the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthal several 100,000 years ago. We won, us Homo sapiens.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of Neanderthal blood in us, right? And so you could go back several 100,000 years. And in terms of war, there's only two that have been fought in social media. And when people are looking for black and white, simple answers, you're not going to get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk about new media before we dive into your fabulous explanation of the U.S. electoral system. I want to.
Do you want to begin with the Homo sapiens there too?
Is that where you're going to start? Probably. So I want to talk about this concept of new media, because I don't know if you've heard, probably not, but in Canada, our media market is shrinking, and we've had tons of layoffs in the mainstream media, especially in the last few weeks. One of our biggest networks just laid off a ton of people. They closed down some of their broadcasts. And like where I live, there's no new news now on CTV, which is wild.
We call those news deserts here in the US.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So as somebody that's kind of reshaping new media in the US market, and if for those that want to follow along with this concept of new media, Mo was just featured in the New York Times recently talking about this very issue.
Traditional media recognizing new media.
Exactly. That's right. So talk to us about that in the US. Like, what is the media market like? How are you disrupting it?
Well, I appreciate the compliment. We're trying our best. As I told the Times reporter, I don't know if they used the quote. I said, we're like the Marine motto, the U.S. Marines motto is the few, the proud, the Marines.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about those of us trying to do nonpartisan, balanced, non-incendiary news on social media, because guess what really plays on social media? The extreme stuff and the bad information. And so I think what I recognized during my time in traditional media, but now has been reinforced to me over the past 5 years, building out a brand on Instagram, is you got to go where the people are, right? Yeah. And ultimately, we all began using social media for what it was intended for. Connecting with friends, posting baby photos, posting pictures of your brunch. That's how Instagram starts, right? The first YouTube video ever is my day at the zoo.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, to connect with girls on campus. This is how these platforms started.
Right.
They all evolved into sources for news and information.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, you've seen that. You can kind of mark certain points. I think for Instagram in particular, it was COVID really kind of was the explosion, especially in the US, in terms of Instagram not just being, beautiful photos and family pictures and vacations anymore, but like, let me tell you what's going on with masks and, riots in Minneapolis and whatnot.
Right.
And so I think that what I'm trying to do is bring my experience as a journalist in traditional media and the standards we bring, fact checking, balance, not just reposting things because they feel right, but actually checking them out, to a place that is a messy place where people don't tend to do that. In fact, I try to tell people, I was like, the best thing you can do is like, don't hit the repost. Don't immediately comment. Like, check it out, because ultimately you're just adding to misinformation, and in some cases disinformation, right? Intentional bad information out there. And so I think we've adapted the fact that most of us are there, and because we're living our lives there, we should ensure that there are trusted, verified places people can go for the complex things happening in our world.
It was interesting. I remember when, I think it was Twitter first, when Twitter was Twitter, first added that.
It's always going to be Twitter to me. I can't call it X.
Now they call it X
either.
Formerly Twitter.
Formerly Twitter. Yeah. It's like Prince. Anyway, when they had the disclaimer that would show up, which is like, do you want to read this article before you repost it? Which I thought was great, right? Because it's like, we're reposting headlines, and what are headlines written for? They're written to grab your attention. They don't necessarily reflect the nuance of an entire article. So, that was helpful for a minute.
And even the Instagram story that I do, typically it's like 4 to 8 sentences. And people are like, you didn't mention this. I'm like, we're in an Instagram slide. Like, I'm going to try my best to give you the basic facts, to give you context over a couple slides. But I'm not an encyclopedia. If you would like to learn more, here's a link. But some people are like, well, people only read the headlines. I'm like, well, if they read the first sentence after the headline, I explain that. And I think that, people have a short attention spans, and we respect people's time. And so ultimately you're trying to break things down in a simple way. But what I also like about Instagram, and I think you guys recognize that too, is that it is a place where you can break things down, where you can bring context. One of my frustrations at CBS and a lot of the mainstream media is, tonight we'll bring you the news in 20 minutes after commercials here in the US. And I can tell you about 8 to 9 stories.
Exactly.
Each story is about 1 minute, 20 seconds.
Yes.
If 1 minute 45 is like a documentary in the US. And I'm trying to explain what to you? Israel-Palestine in 1 minute and 20 seconds. I'm trying to explain Ukraine-Russia. I'm trying to explain the budgeting process. I'm trying to explain the immigration issue in the US. Pick your thing and be like, Moshe, how much time do I got for that? Your reporter would ask. I was like, listen, the other one went long, so now you have 68 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. We're pulling from you, the war correspondent.
And at least on social media, I'm like, today I'm going to just devote myself to this topic, and let's start at the beginning. Literally, I have on one of our premium account, our subscriber account, I did 4,000 years of Israel-Palestine in 40 slides.
Oh my God.
And I literally tried to go all the way back to the Canaanites and the Philistines and the ancient kingdom of Israel. And I'm like, here, like, just to give you a sense of what has happened on this land. And I'm not going to be comprehensive. I'm not a master's course. I'm not going to give you a doctoral thesis, but I'm going to try to give you a little bit more context than I could at CBS.
It's amazing. So I'm curious before we are going to get to Electoral College, but anyway, before we get there,
the exciting stuff.
The exciting stuff. I'm curious though, one of the biggest criticisms, especially when it comes to media and the stories of the day and politics in particular, is how divisive it can be. Are you finding on the platform that you've chosen on Instagram that the comments don't allow for the kind of like open, kind dialogue that we might like, or do you enjoy that? Do you think that opening it up and letting people kind of discuss and debate the issue and the topic is a good thing?
If you had asked me about a year ago, I would have said, both for the most part, the comments are always relatively respectful. I can like scan through them, and there's always a couple schmucks in there that I can like delete or block or whatever. Now, I will say, when it comes to presidential politics in the U.S., when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the comments are a mess. And, part of me is like, do I do anyone a service by even allowing comments? Now, I will say this. algorithmically, as an account, I benefit from a lot of engagement in the comments.
Interesting.
But then I'll also get comments from people or messages from people being like, "Oh my God, Moshe, like I didn't realize your following was so nasty." I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't control these people. Now, what I can control for is who I allow in there. So you have to follow my account to comment, which, by the way, has actually cleaned things up a bit.
Has it?
Allowing anyone who doesn't even follow the account to just chime in on stuff that's gone viral, you get a lot of messy things.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually take the moment to follow the account, you typically, I would say, you actually you want nonpartisan news, you want verified things. You tend to operate at a slightly higher level in terms of your engagement. But listen, we live in very divisive times. And so I think people are very passionate. And I didn't even mention all the issues, like whether it's the gun issue in the US or whether, abortion, all these various issues, and people are very passionate about them.
Of course.
And sometimes I will try to pin exchanges that I find respectful. And then there's just really mean-spirited stuff, which is very unfortunate. And one of the reasons I chose Instagram 5 years ago is it was a nicer place than Twitter.
Yeah.
And sadly, I feel like at times when you look in the comments there, you're like, you ain't much better than Twitter. Now, I will tell you that TikTok is a very ugly place when it comes to comments, and Instagram is still better than that if we're grading on a curve.
All right.
We're too old for TikTok, so we wouldn't know.
I try to engage on the TikTok.
It's hard.
But I know that you guys have a challenge right now in Canada. You can't even get news on your social media right now.
We cannot.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why Beyond a Ballot is so important, because we provide news when nobody else is talking about it on social media. Pretty much. It's our politicians also aren't allowed on TikTok. Did you know that? Because it's owned by a foreign government. Yeah.
Here in the US, we're figuring out how to make rules related to TikTok. There's a lot of talk about TikTok, but not much in the way of actual rulemaking in our country. States are trying to ban it on their government phones. But on their personal phones, politicians still use it. And by the way, notably, President Biden, for all of his criticism of TikTok,
is on TikTok. Is he dancing on TikTok?
not
pay
dancing,
to see that.
but he's doing viral videos. And the first one they released was ahead of the Super Bowl.
Interesting.
He brought up the average age of TikTok here in the US by a couple of years.
I bet.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I also saw he was eating ice cream this week, probably on TikTok.
He's always eting ice cream. If you follow Joe Biden close enough.
Oh, really?
It's a thing.
That's hilarious.
Know that
Very
either.
Selena Myers. Okay. Let's dive into the electoral system, okay? Electing a president. It's something that we don't do in Canada. And
correct.
It takes Canadians, I find, a lot to understand that we actually don't elect our prime minister. We elect the party, and the leader becomes the prime minister. Why in the US do you have specific elections dedicated to president? Why? Tell us everything.
Well, let's go back to the 1780s.
Yes.
When at that time, as the US wins its independence from the UK, there is no country on earth that directly elects its leaders. And it becomes a huge debate because, frankly, it's the first real modern democracy. You have to, fast forward from Greece a couple millennia.
Right.
And, the founding fathers are literally looking back to the Greeks and the Romans for how to create a system. And so, there was a point, by the way. George Washington is the general who wins the war. And there are people who their only experience is king. And they're like, you know what, let's just make him king. Let's make him leader for life.
Yeah.
He won independence. America's independent. And that becomes a real debate. And that's why it's a big deal that George Washington, after 2 terms as president, steps down. Sets that precedent, really. We would eventually wait till the 20th century to pass an amendment to the Constitution that limits 2 terms in office, because, of course, Franklin Roosevelt would be elected 4 times in the aftermath of that. They're like, let's go the George Washington precedent. So this is a big deal at that time, is that despite people saying you should be king, it's like, no. We fought a war and got independence, so we wouldn't have kings. Now, you have a bunch of founders in the 1770s and 80s who come up with a couple systems. In fact, our first system doesn't work out. It's called the Articles of Confederation. It goes for a few years. It gives too much power to the states. It's a mess. Then a couple years later, they come back. They're like, let's try this again. Let's have a convention for the Constitution. And so they come up with a constitution with lessons learned from the articles. And in that, they come up with a bunch of rules. And again, they're first out of the gate here in terms of modern elections.
Right.
And there's a whole debate. And the founders essentially, some of them say Congress should elect the president. We can't trust the people to do this. And some people say, no, we should trust the people. A complicating factor there, by the way, is that half the states have slaves.
Right.
How do you count them?
Yeah.
How do you count that population? There ends up being an ugly compromise called a 3/5 compromise, meaning slaves, black slaves in the U.S., count as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of electoral politics.
Wow.
And a lot of the compromises you see that we still have some of them today, 180 years post-slavery, are due to compromises made between the North and the South in the 1780s due to the fact that half the country had slaves.
Wow.
And so, so we directly elect president, sort of, but we have what are called electors that you actually elect. So if you're in the state of New York, as I am, when I vote for whomever for president, there are two slates of electors. One for Democrats, one for Republicans, depending on who gets the most votes. Those become the electors for the state. Now, one thing they also didn't anticipate at the time of the 1780s, political parties. They didn't exist yet.
Right.
In fact, George Washington, the founder, said political parties sound like a terrible idea. It would be about 40 years into American history where you really start to see the rise of political parties. But you already see it in the first election. Washington steps down. Our first competitive election, John Adams, the VP, Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, compete against each other, effectively create their own parties. And you see the beginning of party politics. Now, back to the election here. So I vote for candidate X. Their slate. I live in New York. It's a very democratic state.
Right.
It hasn't gone Republican in decades. So typically, the Democratic electors are going to represent my state, and they go to something called the Electoral College.
Right.
And each state, based on its population breakdown, has a certain number of electors. In California, the most, and then you have some states, that have very few. Now, 48 of the 50 states here in the U.S. Have winner-take-all electors, meaning if a Democratic candidate, let's say, this year Joe Biden beats Donald Trump by one vote in the state of Ohio. Okay. All of their electors will go to the Electoral College and vote for Joe Biden. There are two states, Maine and Nebraska, where they actually split it. And that was actually the vision of the founders 200 years ago, is split Electoral College. Like, the electors should represent the will of the people.
Right.
But the states all went with winner take all, and that's where we sit today. And so that is why, as you watch this election unfold here in the U.S., while we have 50 states, it basically plays out in 8 or 9 of them, competitive ones, where you have a really close balance between Democrats and Republicans, what we call purple states here, because Republicans are red, Democrats have gotten the color blue, and so we
is that
call
a
them
swing
purple.
state? Swing state.
Swing states.
Okay.
Swing states. So these are the states that you look out for. The election will be run in the following states: Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire.
Florida?
In recent years, it used to be competitive. Florida's become much more red.
Ohio
used to be competitive. That's become much more red. Colorado used to be competitive. That's become much more blue. Virginia and North Carolina are still pretty competitive as well. But ultimately, that means that as I sit here in New York, there will be no real election or money spent on me. No one cares about my views because it's a guaranteed blue state. And so we don't have a national election. And by the way, I should note, I just had someone on my podcast, the Mo News podcast, who discussed electoral history here. We were pretty close in the 70s to killing the Electoral College. It didn't go through Congress through a constitutional amendment. And ultimately, that has meant that we are the last country on earth, democratically, non-authoritarian, that does not directly elect their leader. We have the Electoral College. Argentina also had an Electoral College, and they killed theirs a couple decades ago. So we sit here dealing with the rules made by a bunch of founding fathers in their 20s and 30s in the 1780s due to the compromises related to slave states, a variety of issues at the time. And by the way, I'll note one more thing, fun political history for you. Thomas Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration of Independence, the third president of these United States, anticipated that the Constitution would be completely thrown out every 20 years. In fact, most of the founders did. They said, listen, technology is going to evolve. Things will evolve. You can amend the Constitution, and I'm sure there will be hundreds and hundreds of amendments and rewrites over time. Since the passing of the Constitution 250 years ago, there have been 27 amendments, 10 of which came originally in the Bill of Rights, several of which happened around the Civil War. And so effectively, we've really only amended the Constitution about 10 times in the last 150 years.
Oh my God.
Didn't know that.
And we thought we were bad for only writing a constitution in 1982. My gosh.
Wow.
Come to Washington. We got some stuff to show you.
That is so complicated, honestly.
It's so complicated.
Like, no
do you feel like
wonder.
it's complicated? Maybe you don't.
But I hope that explanation made sense.
No, it
did.
does.
Do it again?
It makes
okay.
no, it makes sense. It's just so much. Are you
It's a lot.
It's like a lot. Are you personally an advocate for electoral reform? Like, would you
1,000 million %. That number doesn't even exist. But yes.
Yes.
I think we have a problem in this country. We have a broken system here.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason it's broken is we've refused to change it for the times. And a lot, has been focused on, and you even come up through civics and government education here in the US. And, you hold these founding fathers in high esteem, these geniuses.
Wow.
And in many cases, they came up with some really compelling ideas that have held up for several centuries, that have served as examples for governments around the world.
For sure.
At the same time, they will be the first ones back then in their letters to acknowledge their flaws and anticipating issues. And I think one of the issues that has happened is that party politics have gotten in the way of what's good for the country. Mm-hmm. We now have several Congresses now here in the US have been the least productive in American history. We have major issues, and a lot of them are not being resolved because the way, I won't even get into gerrymandering, redistricting, and how we create our districts for House members here, the equivalent of parliamentarians who we also directly elect here based on geography. But that has meant that I mentioned about the presidential campaign is run in about 8 states. Yeah. Out of 435 House members, about 40 of them are competitive. Wow. The rest of them, 300 plus, are locked in hardcore Republican, hardcore Democrat.
I'm going to just stop you there because I want to go back. You will not believe this, but I would say most Canadians do not understand the difference between your houses, what Congress is and what the Senate is. We have the House of Commons and we have the Senate, but our Senate is very controversial, very different from the way that yours runs.
More like a House of Lords.
Exactly.
Yeah, sort of.
It is a House of Lords. Exactly. Yeah. So what can you just break down for us what is the House and what is the Senate in the US?
Okay, so just rewind here back to our founders, our friends in the late 18th century. They came up with 3 what they called co-equal parts of government. The executive branch, the president, and the White House. Mm-hmm. And that's where they didn't come up with the prime minister, et cetera. They're like, we're going to have a president, and the president is both the head of state and head of government. Mm-hmm. Then we're going to create a Supreme Court, our judicial body. At the time it was 6 justices. Now it's 9 justices. It's fluctuated through time. They are lifetime appointees. That's another issue we have here in the U.S. We're the only modern democracy that has lifetime appointments to the highest court in the land. And then you have the legislative body, Congress, split into 2 sections, the House and the Senate. So Congress is the all-encompassing term. When we refer to Capitol Hill here, or you see it in the media, Capitol Hill is where the U.S. Congress is located. Okay. Over on the House side, you have 435 members. They each represent about 600,000 Americans. Wow. In the 50 states. Wow. Every 10 years, we have a census here, and there's redistricting that happens. Those decisions of where those borders are drawn are done by the 50 states respectively, all in different ways, all with different rules. And whichever party controls the state legislature in each of those states makes a determination on how to redraw those rules to the benefit of that party. Hence the term gerrymandering, which is actually named after a Massachusetts legislator 200 years ago named Elbridge Gerry, but they've now changed it to Jerry.
Jerry.
He was known as Gerry though.
That's hilarious.
So they've determined over time that for the most part they can do that. Anyway, rewind. So you have the House, and House members come from various states based on the population of those states. Is how many House members you get. So some states get 1 House member, like South Dakota, based on their population. Some have more than 50 members, like California. And then you have the US Senate, where that was meant as a body to ensure equal representation for all the states. This was back to the founders. Some of the states, like Delaware at the time, are like, we're really small and Virginia's really big. And the House is going to be dominated by a couple big states with huge populations. What about us? They said compromise. In the Senate, all states get 2 senators. Two senators that represent the state. And they serve 6-year terms in the U.S. Over on the House side, 2-year terms.
Wow,
And to
that's
confuse things
short.
further, the president serves a 4-year term.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem. On the House side, to your point, they're basically always running for re-election.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's one of the issues with the 2-year election.
Oh my God.
Speaking of elections, Canadians are obviously very, very, very interested in the presidential election. The campaign is underway already in many respects. Can you give us a quick breakdown of where we're at right now, and maybe touch on something that's coming up in a few days, which is Super Tuesday? So that, because we're hearing a lot about Super Tuesdays.
So this will be out before Super Tuesday.
Yes. We are currently live on Friday.
Yes.
Perfect. So where are we in the election? Well, we have an election here this year where we have an incumbent president. You get to serve 2 terms, as we've discussed. Biden has served, he's in his first term, and he has chosen to run for re-election, despite some people in his own party saying, you're the oldest president of all time. You're 81 years old. By the end of your second term, you'll be 86. We've never seen anything like that.
Wow.
Are you sure? And as the commander-in-chief and leader of the free world, as we like to say about our presidents here in the U.S., why would I give up on 4 more years in power?
Oh my God.
The other thing that Biden has said is that he believes he is the only person to stop Donald Trump, that he stopped him in 2020. And so he has chosen to run again for the sake of democracy, the nation, and his party. As he says, he's running for re-election. So what has that meant? Not really much of a competition on the Democratic side.
Right.
There have been a couple people who are running against him to give you any indication of where things are at. South Carolina in a recent primary. By the way, as an incumbent president, you still have to run for re-election, go through the primaries. Biden got 95% of the vote of his party.
Right.
So that's where, despite the criticism, despite some infighting within the party, it appears, based on the Democrats who are showing up to vote in a non-competitive primary, Joe Biden's still their guy. Okay, so that's the Dem side. That'll get affirmed at what's called the convention, the Democratic Convention in Chicago this summer, pending any sort of, obviously health issue, major crisis, etc. Anything can happen. Pretty certain at this time something doesn't happen. Joe Biden is your Democratic nominee, and we go to a general election that typically starts right after Labor Day here in the U.S., the first weekend of September. On the Republican side, a very unique circumstance. This is only, we've had a couple times in American history where an incumbent, a former president who has lost, has decided to run again. The last time we saw this was Teddy Roosevelt 120 years ago.
Wow.
Teddy Roosevelt was the Republican president, lost. The party didn't want him anymore. They replaced him with a guy named William Taft. He comes back. He starts a party called the Bull Moose Party, runs for re-election, and the third party loses. You actually have to go back to the late 1800s to a president named Grover Cleveland. So Grover Cleveland is America's 22nd and 24th president. He won, serves for 4 years, loses, then 4 years later is like, I want back in, gets elected again. So he would be the one example in American history who Trump is trying to replicate here. Wow. Because typically American presidents, whether they serve 1 term or 2, well, 2 you can't run again, but after they serve 1 term and lose, go away. They go serve on boards. They go do philanthropy.
They build libraries
devoted to themselves here in the U.S. That's a tradition. You could do a whole tour of presidential libraries across the U.S.
Yeah,
Some are
and I
more
will.
fascinating than
And
others.
I will.
You should. You should. It's
You want to come
fascinating.
with me? We'd have such a good time.
Listen, I've been to the Reagan Library. I've been to the George W. Bush Library. We actually were there when he opened it. I've been to the Gerald Ford Library. He was president for like 2 years.
Yep.
But there's a bunch that I have not been to. So let's do a tour.
Yeah, let's do it. Would anyone listen
presidents
to
typically
it?
They typically go build a library. Trump said, nope.
Nope.
In fact, he still claims he won in 2020.
Right.
And says, I'm going to run again because I want to be president again. Now, he has some legal issues he's facing.
Okay, wait, but isn't he also really old? Isn't Trump also up
he's
there?
3 years younger than Biden. He's
Right?
77.
Are people talking about that in the States or just Biden's
People
age?
are people are talking about both. They're the two oldest men to run for president in history. They would be the two oldest men inaugurated. And they would both be in their 80s in their second term. Now, the one thing going in Trump's favor here is that he has more energy when he speaks.
Yeah.
We elect our presidents here based on personality.
Mhm.
You know, there was the test many years ago, like, who do you rather have a beer with
For
as
sure.
president?
We just
And
had that
typically-
test here.
Yeah.
We just had that one. This was a headline
Yeah.
last week.
And when you look at it, if you go through American electoral history, at least since the advent of television, the person you want to have a beer with typically wins. And so Trump has decided he wants back in. And there was some consternation. There were some issues within the party, especially in the aftermath of January 6th. But then what happens? There was a feeling within the party faithful that Trump is being mistreated by Joe Biden, that these legal issues are not legitimate.
Right.
And so you can actually see the moment Trump is indicted for the first of 4 times last year, and we've never had this before,
Yeah.
presidents being indicted 4 times criminally. He's got 4 criminal trials he's facing. The Republican base says, whoa, you're coming after him, and this is not legitimate. And you see his rise in the polls. And so you saw a number of people run against Trump. Nikki Haley's the last one left.
Yeah.
But for the most part, Republican voters, the majority of them, the base voters, now independents and some Republicans are over Trump, have said, we want our guy back. We want the original thing. We like him. The times were better pre-Biden. Let's put him back in there. And by the way, helping him, polls show he's competitive, neck and neck, and in some cases, edging out Biden in early polls 8 months out in a number of these key states. And that's reinforced to many Republicans. Well, you know what? He can win in the fall. And that was an argument Nikki Haley made, was like, he can't win in the fall. And polls now show, now it shows her doing better against Biden, but that's not much of an argument. They're like, no, we trust that he can win. And so we're going through a primary process here in the U.S. right now on the Republican side.
So what's going to happen? Who's going to be your
What's
next
your prediction?
president?
Oh, wow, we're jumping. So,
well, I
first of
could
all-
dive into Nikki Haley if you wanted. Why is she,
No, it's
why
okay.
is she
She-
staying in this race, and when is she getting
Because
out
she
of it?
can. Because
Oh.
she can.
Mm.
Why
Because
wouldn't
she's
she?
preparing for next time.
Trump's really old. He could
Mhm.
something could happen to him.
Totally.
Why drop out
Is she
until
gonna
the
be
last
his
possible
VP?
second? So
Who's the VP?
that's going to be fascinating. I mean, he's collecting delegates right now. He's going to have the nomination locked up for the Republican, based on Republican rules, within the next 3 or 4 weeks, and then he's got to choose whose VP is going to be, which typically is a non-event here in the U.S. We like in the media to cover it. No one's voting based on the VP, except this year maybe, because we have the 2 oldest presidents in history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the VP constitutionally is who replaces them.
When
So
when Kamala
VP will
Harris
mean
got
more this year.
appointed VP, I was screaming in Canada. I'll tell you that much. I was excited. There's a lot of people that
Well,
are
she's-
excited for her.
She's the first female vice president that
Yeah.
we've had in the U.S.
Yep.
By the way, we still haven't had a female president here in the U.S. And when you look at most of modern democracies, like there's 40 or 50. I mean, Pakistan's had one. Like you look around the world, India's had one. You go around the world, and in the US, we
Canada's
still
never
haven't
had
one.
an elected one. Never. Only
Oh.
one, and she was not elected. She came into the leadership and then lost terribly. So we're close behind you.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of talk here that we've entered the age here in the U.S. where Trump will likely have to choose a woman to be his VP. And so where we're at on that is they typically make that choice in the summer. And the way that Trump can approach it is, does he pick someone who agrees with him on everything and really riles up the right wingers and the people in his base? Or does he pick someone with crossover appeal? That would be
Right.
the Nikki Haley choice. There are a lot of people in his party who say, she said a lot of mean things about you, and you can't pick her. And so it really depends on how you want to churn out the vote in the fall. I think, conventional wisdom, and it's always hard to apply that to Donald Trump here, but is that he goes with someone who agrees with him
Yes.
on everything,
Sure.
given his experience with Mike Pence on January 6th.
Yeah.
And so I think the Nikki Haley scenario is less likely than some of the others. There's the governor of South Dakota. Her name is Kristi Noem. There's a congresswoman from New York named Elise Stefanik. There's a
We
few
talked about
others
her.
who are
DeSantis?
very much like DeSantis is certainly someone he would consider. I mean, this is the thing. It got nasty between them,
Yeah.
but Trump is actually, a strategist.
Right.
And he's going to be looking at what gets me back in the Oval Office, what gets me back in the White House. And he's
Yeah.
going to go with that equal parts with someone who's loyal to me and agrees with me and
Yeah.
doesn't get in front of me on things.
For sure.
Okay, so who's the president of the United States this fall?
Oh boy. I'm not in
Should
the
we put
prediction
money
game.
on
I'll
it?
tell you it'll be
No.
very, very close, Rachel and Amanda. Very close.
Very close.
We've had a few of them. If you look back now at recent American elections, they've literally been decided by a couple hundred votes in 2000 between Gore and Bush. John Kerry and Bush in 2004 came down to 60,000 votes in Ohio.
Oh my God.
If you go fast forward to Obama blew it out both times, but you go to 2016, Hillary versus Trump, it came down to about 80,000 votes between 4 states that allowed Trump to get in there: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then even Joe Biden. Despite it all, Joe Biden wins by a very slim margin in Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, that allows him to become president. So while we have 150 million votes here in the U.S. Cast in the last election, it came down to less than 100,000.
And I think there's a lot of question about foreign interference in U.S. Well, we're talking about it in Canada too. And so do you think there's a feeling of Americans that they don't trust the outcomes of these elections?
You think?
Well, you have one side literally saying
Yeah.
the results are not legitimate. In fact, when you ask Trump voters today in a number of these states who won the 2020 election, 80+% of them say Trump won. There was corruption. Illegal immigrants voted. Biden, used illegitimate tactics to be president. That is believed, and that's an issue we have with American democracy right now. Is you do have people who are not respecting the result. You could go back. Famous election here is 1960, Kennedy Nixon.
Of course,
Kennedy won very, very slim margin. There were legit questions about the connections between the Kennedys, the mafia, and the vote in the state of Illinois. In fact, there were people in the days after the election who told Richard Nixon, hey, you should call for an investigation. Some funny business may have happened there.
Wow.
Nixon said, no, I will not undermine the democracy. He, despite evidence to the contrary, decides I'm going to step off. I'll declare Kennedy the winner. And then what happens? Nixon runs 8 years later and becomes president 8 years later. But, we haven't had this sort of fundamental, purposeful undermining of democracy and results at this level until 2020.
I know. I
Well,
feel like we could talk about this for hours.
can we ask one piece of Canadian trivia before we go? Should we do that?
Oh God!
First of all, before you do that though, I'm curious. Are you spending much time or any time thinking about Canadian politics? Like, does it? Do you write about it? Does it? I'm just curious.
Honestly, the most amount of time we spent recently was the trucker situation you guys had.
Oh,
was
yes.
that, what, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Oh, just the biggest story in Canadian modern history. No big deal. Yep.
So that was a story I closely followed.
Okay.
The biggest story probably in the last year was the fires you guys had, mainly because we had to breathe in the smoke here in the US.
Yeah. No kidding.
I think that obviously the controversy, the issue that you guys in India have had recently related to the assassination of the leader there. So I think that, there are a few stories that tend to pop. I have to tell you that there's so much overwhelming news that comes from here stateside that the bandwidth is difficult. But, a handful of stories will sort of poke through. I think that we are a lot of Americans who are at least familiar with things beyond our boundaries, are familiar with Trudeau and follow that storyline and are curious about that. But in the same way, you have questions about how this American system works.
Right.
I spend time trying to explain basic parliamentary politics to Americans who don't understand how parliament and coalitions and no confidence votes and all of that works, because we don't have that. And so I think, people have to get over that hump. And I think that for the most part, we Americans by reputation tend to only think about ourselves and think that the world revolves around us.
Well, it does in some ways.
We're not surprised.
We're all at the edge of our seats looking at your politics.
And I think Americans sometimes underestimate that.
Yeah.
That like what we do, like how closely the rest of the world watches what happens and the impact of our words and our actions. on the rest of the world and what it means to our influence, or more recently, our lack of influence over global events.
Yeah, particularly and interestingly, the Trump effect, and how, even the language, like the nomenclature, the tone, things that we see that regurgitated here. And I think that
In
we
Canada,
often call like, oh yeah, like we'll say like you're using the Trump playbook. We'll use it. Well, there probably isn't a show that we do in our work as commentators where Trump doesn't come up in the show as it relates to our own politicians.
Yeah.
He's reimagined politics. Like, you don't need to apologize for things anymore.
Nope. You can be indicted.
Anything that negative that happened. Anything that negative that happens about you, you just call fake.
Exactly.
Right? You know what's helping that? AI. Totally. Oh, that's AI. That audio is not me. I mean, can you imagine that today? And then you see that, by the way, everywhere. You saw Netanyahu call, the results fake and fake news in Israel. You saw Milei, the new leader of Argentina, adopt MAGA, make Argentina great again.
Oh my God.
As opposed to make America great again. He's wearing the same hats, the MAGA hats down there. And so, you see that everywhere.
Wow. So where do we go from here, though? Does it just degrade? Does the U.S. just overflow to every other country and degrade politics? Not to blame your entire nation.
Took a dark
world
turn.
destruction.
Yeah, Rachel,
but I'm
you're
sorry,
ending this podcast on a very pessimistic note.
Because I just feel like so many people say to me, I'm so discouraged from being involved in politics. And I, in my mind, frankly, often blame the U.S.
That's the goal of these people.
That is the goal. Yeah. I agree with you. That is the goal.
By undermining the media and undermining politics, you get the good people out.
Yeah.
And that allows you to then manipulate the system.
Okay,
we talked about news deserts at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah.
Well, guess when there's no news covering things, guess what people can get away with?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anything, right?
We fill the gap.
Okay, let's end on a happy note.
Okay.
Canadian trivia.
Okay.
Can you name any of the parties in our country?
You have the Conservatives.
Yep.
You have Labor.
Nope.
They're called Liberals. You call them Liberals.
Yes, there we go. Liberals. Yep. Sorry. Okay, that's 2. How many parties do we have in our house? Any idea?
I'm very embarrassed here.
Don't worry.
I should have done a quick primer.
Nah.
Nope. What about
the Liberal Democrats as well in Canada?
We have Democrats, but they're not Liberal Democrats. They're New Democrats. The NDP.
New Democrats.
Yep.
Got it.
We have the Bloc. We can't forget them.
Okay.
And the Greens.
The Greens.
Yes.
We have a Green Party here. They just can't get into Congress because we have like a 2-party system.
Yeah.
We actually have multiple parties here in the US. The way that the 2 main parties have built a system around themselves has meant that they can't break out.
Right.
And so that's the issue. But I did not study up on my Canadian politics.
Okay.
Now I'm very embarrassed as a news person.
That's fine. That's why you need us. We'll come and educate your audience on Canadian politics.
Yes.
Anytime.
Yes.
Anytime.
Right before the Canadian election.
Do you know when it is? Do you know when it is?
I do not know. When's the Canadian election?
2025.
2025.
October.
Oh, it's next year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of elections this year.
There are.
Around the world.
Yes.
Some more legitimate than others. So
that's why
I'm
we're
looking
waiting.
forward, actually. Let's do this. We're going to have you.
Okay.
Once we get through our election here.
Yep.
Let's hope peacefully.
Let's hope.
Yes, please.
Then last time we will have you on in the aftermath of our election discussing your election.
Fabulous. No one will tune in because they'll all be exhausted of politics by that point. But we're in.
Oh boy,
we're in. And hopefully
that's the least of our problems. Let's hope exhaustion's our only problem after our election.
Yeah, amen. Okay, we have to leave it there, but hopefully we have you back as we get closer to the U.S. election, because I have learned so much today, and hopefully everyone listening has as well. That's
my excuse, by the way.
What?
I have to use all my brain power to understand our system. That's why I don't even know your parties.
There you go.
There was a lot of information. Yeah, so I think you're skating through this one.
I'm going to re-listen.
I know Elbridge, Jerry, but I don't know
Gary.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God.
Gary.
That's hilarious. Okay. Thank you so much. We want to thank Moshe from Mo News, and want to encourage all of you to please follow him on Instagram. It's an incredible resource when it comes to U.S. politics, but also world politics. Thanks so much.
Not Canadian politics. That's clear.
You talk about fires. That's important. All right. Thanks, Moshe. We'll talk to you soon. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
And
And that's another episode. Thanks so much for joining us. If you love our podcast, don't forget to subscribe and tell all your friends and family to do the same. Next week, we are back with a huge episode for International Women's Day. So stay tuned for some information on that. We'll speak to you then.